Oh, you're going to want to hear this one. I still can't believe it happened, and even now when I think about it, my heart beats a little faster. Before I tell you though, tell me, where are you watching from? I always love hearing your cities, your little corners of the world. And if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It helps more than you know, and it lets me keep sharing stories like this one with you. All right, deep breath. Here we go. It started on one of those early summer evenings when the air feels soft and the light lingers just long enough to make you forget time. Our backyard patio has always been my sanctuary. Stone tiles warmed by the sun, potted lavender along the fence, and that faint hum of cicadas that only comes when the day's heat begins to slip away. I was sitting out there with a glass of white wine, just enjoying the quiet after a long week. My husband, Greg, was running late that evening. He had one of those after-work get-togethers with his team. You know the kind, half celebration, half office gossip, and a little bit of let's all pretend we're not exhausted. He told me his colleague, Mark, would drop by afterward to pick up a folder Greg forgot that morning. Nothing unusual. Mark had been over before, a few times for dinner, always polite, always the man who smiled just enough, but never too much. It was around 8 when I heard the car door outside. The light on the patio was dim, the kind that softens everything. Edges, thoughts, and maybe even years. Mark appeared at the gate, tall silhouette against the fading sky, his shirt sleeves rolled up, jacket draped over one arm. "Evening, Lisa," he said, his voice low, friendly. "Greg said I could swing by for that folder?" I stood, smiling, and motioned for him to come in. Of course. He left it on the kitchen counter. "I'll grab it for you." But Mark hesitated. "Mind if I sit for a moment? That traffic out there." He laughed softly, gesturing toward the street. "Not at all," I said. "Actually, it's nice out here. Sit." I went inside for the folder, and when I came back, he'd taken a seat across from where I'd been sitting. He'd loosened his tie, leaned back just slightly, his hand resting near the base of his glass of water I'd left out earlier. I handed him the folder, but he didn't reach for it right away. His eyes lingered, not in a way that made me uncomfortable, but as if he was really seeing me for the first time. "Greg's lucky," he said quietly. "You've got a beautiful home." I smiled, but there was something in his tone that carried more than politeness. It was admiration, maybe even longing. "Thank you. I've tried to make it feel peaceful," I replied, sitting back down. For a while, we just talked. About small things at first, the garden, the weather, his teenage daughter applying to colleges, my son living across the country. The conversation unfolded easily, like two people remembering what it felt like to be listened to. The sun had gone down completely by then, and the patio lights gave everything a golden glow. At one point he laughed, a full, genuine laugh, and I realized I hadn't heard that kind of sound in my backyard for a long time. Greg used to laugh like that too, before work took most of his energy. I found myself smiling more than I expected. There was something soothing in Mark's presence. He wasn't pushing for anything, not even attention. Just being there. Listening. Asking questions. And when I spoke about things I didn't even realize I'd been holding in, the quiet loneliness that comes when the kids are gone, the strange ache of feeling invisible, he didn't interrupt or offer solutions. He just nodded, eyes soft, steady. "Lisa," he said after a pause, his voice almost a whisper, "do you ever feel like life shifted when you weren't looking? Like you woke up and realized the parts that made you feel alive got lost somewhere between responsibilities and routine?" I looked at him, and for a moment I couldn't answer. Because yes, that was exactly it. I'd never said it aloud, not even to Greg. "I think," I finally said, "we stop noticing the small things that used to matter. We start playing it safe." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. eyes catching the soft light. Maybe that's why moments like this happen, to remind us we're still here. I felt something stir inside me, familiar yet long forgotten. Not desire, not yet, but recognition. The kind you feel when someone looks at you and actually sees the woman beneath the years, beneath the roles. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of jasmine from the fence. I realized how close we were sitting now. Not too close, but enough for awareness to hum in the air between us. He looked down, then back up at me. "I should probably go," he said quietly, though he didn't move. "Yes," I whispered. "Probably." But neither of us stood. There was no touch, no words that crossed a line, just silence, the kind filled with everything unspoken. Finally, he took a breath, reached for the folder, and stood. "Thank you, Lisa, for the company." "Any time," I replied, and I meant it. As he walked toward the gate, I watched him under the patio lights, and something inside me felt awake. Not guilty, not confused, just alive. When the gate clicked shut, I sat back in my chair, staring at the spot where he'd been. The night seemed deeper, the air warmer, my heartbeat louder. And for the first time in years, I felt seen. I didn't know then that this small, quiet evening, just two people on a patio, would change how I looked at myself, my marriage, and everything I thought I understood about love and connection. But that night was only the beginning. The next morning, sunlight poured across the kitchen floor in long golden strips, warming the tiles beneath my bare feet. I stood at the counter, coffee in hand, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Greg was already gone for the day, his half-empty mug still on the table, a familiar sight, somehow comforting and distant all at once. But the calm didn't settle the way it usually did. My thoughts kept circling back to the patio, to that conversation, to Mark. It wasn't about attraction. It was something gentler, more confusing. He'd said things that echoed in the empty spaces of my morning, about feeling lost in the current of everyday life, about waking up one day and realizing the world had grown quieter inside you. I'd brushed those thoughts aside for years, hiding them under errands, family calls, weekend plans. But now, they lingered. That afternoon, I decided to water the garden, something I hadn't done myself in weeks. Kneeling by the lavender beds, I felt the soil between my fingers, cool and alive. The scent of rosemary drifted up, sharp and familiar, reminding me of dinners from long ago when Greg and I first moved here. We were younger then, full of plans and energy, laughing over burnt meals and mismatched plates. I could still see it clearly, the two of us sitting outside, making promises we never knew life would quietly reshape. I smiled at the memory, though it ached a little. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a message. "Thanks again for the talk last night. You have a way of making things feel lighter." I stared at the screen. Mark. For a moment I hesitated, but then I typed back, "It was nice talking to you too. You made me think about things I hadn't in a long time." I put the phone down and kept watering. Simple words, but somehow they felt like a window had opened. Days passed. The memory of that evening didn't fade, but it softened, like ripples after a stone drops into water. Then about a week later, Greg mentioned casually that his team was planning another little get-together. This time, he wanted me to come. "They all think you're a mystery," he said with a grin. "Mark especially. He said you're easier to talk to than most people." I laughed, brushing it off, though something stirred inside me again. Not excitement exactly, more like curiosity. The restaurant was lively that evening, full of voices and the clinking of glasses. I wore a soft blue dress I hadn't taken out in years, not fancy, just comfortable, something that made me feel like myself. When we arrived, I spotted Mark near the back, talking with two others from the office. He looked up as we approached, and his expression changed, that same quiet warmth in his eyes, the kind that doesn't need words. He stood, pulled out a chair for me, and smiled. "Lisa, good to see you again." "Good to see you too," I said, and I meant it. Throughout the evening we all talked, laughed, shared small stories about work and home, life and time. It was ordinary in every way, and yet something about it felt extraordinary. Maybe it was because I was paying attention in a way I hadn't in years. To people, to moments, to myself. When Greg went to speak to someone across the room, Mark leaned in just a little, his voice low but kind. "You seem lighter tonight," he said. "Do I?" I smiled. "Maybe I'm just remembering how to breathe." He nodded, looking at me for a moment before glancing down at his glass. "You remind me that it's okay to slow down, to notice things." There it was again, that steady, quiet connection. Not romantic, not dangerous. Just two people seeing the world through the same tired, hopeful eyes. Later, when we were leaving, Mark thanked Greg for inviting me. Then he turned to me. "Take care of that garden," he said. "It suits you." I smiled all the way home. That night, sitting in bed beside Greg, I felt something unfamiliar. Not guilt, not confusion, but gratitude. For the reminder that life still held newness, even in the most unexpected corners. For the chance to see myself not as someone fading quietly into the background, but as someone still growing, still changing. And as I turned off the light, I whispered a quiet thank you. Not to anyone in particular, but to the universe for nudging me awake again. I didn't know it then, but that sense of renewal, that fragile awareness, would lead to something deeper. Something that would reshape how I saw not just Mark, but myself, and the life I'd built piece by piece. The following weeks felt different, though nothing outwardly had changed. The days still began with coffee, the quiet rustle of the newspaper, and the sound of Greg's car pulling out of the driveway. Yet there was something softer about the mornings now, something that made me look around with fresh eyes, the light across the patio tiles, the way the air moved through the curtains. It's strange how small shifts in perspective can make the familiar feel new. I started tending the garden more regularly, talking with neighbors I hadn't really noticed in years, and taking long evening walks just for the sake of feeling the cool air on my face. Mark and I didn't talk much after that dinner, a message here and there, usually about something simple. But his words from that night stayed with me. "You seem lighter." One Saturday afternoon, as I was trimming the roses, Greg came out to the patio holding 2 glasses of lemonade. "You've been out here a lot lately," he said, smiling. "I have," I admitted. "I forgot how much I love it. I used to come out here every evening." He looked around, nodding. "I remember. We'd sit out here until it got dark. You'd complain about the mosquitoes, and I'd pretend not to notice." We both laughed. It was such a small thing, but for a moment it felt like we'd found a piece of something we'd misplaced years ago. I realized then how easy it is for two people to drift, not out of anger or disappointment, but simply because life fills the spaces between them with noise. Work, family, responsibilities, all of it crowding out the quiet places where connection used to live. That evening, Greg grilled dinner outside for the first time in months. We sat together as the sun went down, just talking, just being. The warmth of the moment reminded me that love doesn't disappear. It just waits for you to look up and notice it again. A few days later, I ran into Mark at the local market. He was in the produce aisle, debating between 2 bunches of parsley of all things. When he spotted me, he smiled. "Lisa, the garden guru herself." I laughed. If only you knew how many plants I've killed trying to earn that title. We talked for a few minutes, about work, about his daughter's college applications, about how quickly the summer was moving. It felt natural, easy, unforced. When we said goodbye, he said something that lingered long after I left. "Thanks for being a good listener," he said. "Sometimes people don't realize how much that matters." On the drive home, I thought about that. How much listening can mean. Maybe that's what had been missing in my life. Real listening, real attention, not just from others, but from myself. That night, I sat out on the patio again. The lavender was in bloom, filling the air with that soft, clean scent that always reminds me of peace. I thought about the past few months, the quiet evenings, the unexpected conversations, the rediscovered moments with Greg. And I realized something simple but powerful, that awakening doesn't always come from grand gestures or dramatic change. Sometimes it begins with a single conversation that reminds you you're still capable of feeling deeply, still capable of growth. I wasn't the same woman I'd been at the start of the summer. Something inside me had opened, a gentleness, a kind of curiosity about the world and about myself. When Greg joined me on the patio later that night, he handed me a cup of tea and said, "You seem different lately, happier." I smiled at him, the kind of smile that comes from truth rather than habit. "Maybe I'm just finally paying attention again," I said. He nodded, taking a sip of his tea, and for the first time in a long while, we sat together in a comfortable silence, two people rediscovering what it meant to simply be there, side by side, under the same evening sky. That summer taught me that moments of clarity don't demand explanation. They just arrive quietly, like dusk settling on the horizon, and if you're lucky, you notice before the light fades. Autumn came quietly that year, almost like a sigh. The lavender had faded, the air turned crisp, and the first leaves had begun to gather along the patio steps. I loved that in-between time, when summer's brightness softened and the world seemed to pause before winter. It always made me reflective, maybe even a little sentimental. One morning, I stepped outside with my cup of coffee, wrapping a shawl around my shoulders. The garden looked different now, subdued but beautiful in its own way. The roses had gone, but the marigolds stood stubbornly bright. I smiled at them, thinking how they reminded me of something Mark once said, that some things bloom longest when you least expect them to. We hadn't spoken much lately. Life had pulled us both back into its familiar rhythm. But his presence lingered in quiet ways, in how I carried myself, in how I noticed things again, in how I allowed small joys to reach me. That was the gift of our brief connection. Not a disruption, not a secret, but a mirror, one that reflected who I had forgotten I was. Greg joined me a few minutes later, his hair still tousled from sleep. He handed me a plate with toast, slightly burnt on one edge, just the way he always did. "The garden's slowing down," he said. "It's supposed to," I replied, smiling. "It's resting." He looked at me for a moment, then nodded. "Maybe we should do that too. Take a break. You and me. Go somewhere quiet for a while." I was surprised, but pleasantly so. "You mean it?" "Yeah," he said, sitting beside me. "I think I forgot what it feels like to just stop for a bit, to be us again." Something warm bloomed inside me, not excitement, but peace. We'd been married for over 30 years, weathered joy and silence, laughter and drift. And now, here he was, wanting to find the quiet together again. Later that week, we packed a small bag and drove up to the mountains, to a cabin we used to visit when the kids were small. It hadn't changed much. The creaky porch steps, the faint smell of pine, the way the wind echoed through the valley. One evening, we sat outside wrapped in blankets, watching the last colors of daylight fade. Greg reached for my hand, and I didn't pull away. The moment wasn't grand or cinematic, just steady. The kind of peace that grows when two people stop expecting perfection and start recognizing the beauty of what remains. We talked about everything and nothing. The children, our plans for retirement, the books we meant to read, the silly memories that made us laugh until tears ran down our faces. And then we just sat there, quiet, listening to the world breathe. It struck me then how easy it is to believe that life's meaning lies in the big moments, The milestones, the passions, the fire.